Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second session, which is very aptly following on from the last session, public and private financing of growth in the EU, view from both sides. We have a very distinguished panel here to discuss that from both sides, from the public and private side. To kick off our discussion, I'm going to turn first to Andrej Babiš, who's the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister for the Czech Republic. So, over to you.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like maybe explain the position of Czech Republic, because for us it's not really about financing. I think our banks are one of the healthiest in Europe. They are full of money. We have 1,800 billion deposits, and the debt is 1,683 billion crowns. We have very good rating. Our 10 years bonds last emission, the coupon was 0.8. So there's no problem to borrow money. It seems that we will have a nice deficit this year. It was planned 112 billion deficit, so we will probably reach 80, and in the meantime we start really to support the consumption and investment. So this is a very good source for financing. The second one is Euro funds, where unfortunately we are one of the worst in Europe. So probably for the last program we will not use up to maybe 3 billion euros. So it is a very big task for our government. And we have a lot of projects, and we will celebrate on Monday 25 years of building so-called capitalism. And if you see of the base of the infrastructure of our state, then we have to realize that the journey by train lasts to Vienna 5 hours, Bratislava 4 hours and a half, Berlin 5 hours, Warsaw 8 hours, Budapest 7 hours. We don't have any highway to Vienna, to Linz. We build highways in average 17 years. We have only highway to Slovakia, the D1, which I came this morning. It was built on the communist era. We don't have any highway between Ostrava and Žilina, where are two big car producers. We don't have any highway to West Poland, Wrocław. And so the problem is that we would like to invest, but the enemy number one of investment are legislation. We have a very famous case. The state was negotiating with Madame Havrankova a small piece of land 18 years. And the highway between Lovosice and Ústí, direction East Germany, also we built already 17 years. So the problem is really how to use this money which we have at disposal, and how to avoid this legislation, this bureaucracy, sometimes corruption, and the system as the system of the state. Yeah. So this is the big problem, and of course now we start to invest, and I have really to say that I'm shocked that, for instance, we have a requirement to build kindergartens for maybe 300 million euro, or there is a lack of basic schools and cleaning water station and so on. So it's really not a very good performance of our state, and we would like to change it. So that's why it's not really about the money. Czech Republic is speaking about PPP projects also during these 20 years. There is no one which was realized. So we would like also maybe to start such a project. We are now in discussion to make some rail connection between Kladno, Prague airport and center of Prague. So this is the situation. So for me, as the Minister of Finance, the task is first to restructure the tax and customs administration, to fight against the tax fraud. So we were now first, Czech Republic, initiate discussion with European Commission about how to avoid VAT gap. VAT gap in European Union was in 2012 133 billion euro was not paid. 16% of VAT is not paid. So for me, the quickest way how to collect money is this, to convince European Commission, and I don't know why this is the competence of European Commission, to decide about the reverse charge. Yeah? So we need it mainly in fuels and also because it's really organized crime. And then we want to introduce systems which Slovakia introduced, this electronic evidence of VAT. It starts in Slovakia in 2013. And then this Croatian model of electronic evidence of sales. So together, if the potential is 1 billion euro to collect more taxes, and the VAT gap potential is 2.7% of GDP, which is about 3.5 billion euro. So this is the situation, and of course now European Union is coming with this Mr. Juncker plan, 300 billion euro. I don't know from where this money will come from, because probably you know the EU don't have money. EU owns individual states 23 billion euro, from this Czech Republic 1.2. And now UK came that they want to pay with installment, without interest, of course. So I'm a little bit afraid that this 300 billion euro should come maybe from the budget which was originally practically fixed for the cohesion politics for the new countries, V4 and so on. So this is very funny. And when we have this meeting in Brussels, everybody was speaking about joint investments and pan-European projects. So then I said, okay, so let's make this TGV, this high-speed train, which ends in Frankfurt. Let's make it. Frankfurt, Berlin, Prague, Warsaw, Vienna, Bratislava, Budapest. So let's make it. Maybe for next generation can use it, but this is a concrete project in this region. Because I mean the infrastructure is the base for everything, and unfortunately, when we separate from Slovakia, or when we separate Czechoslovakia, nobody have read the book of Baťa, which was written in 1937. We built the state for 40 million people, and we didn't make a strategy of the state. Yeah, energy, infrastructure, education and everything. So this is the situation very shortly. My position. I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't. Maybe you expect some other speech, but so it's. I mean, for every country in Europe, the situation is different. So, and my task is, of course, to decrease the debt. We will have a deficit this year, next year, but at the same time, I will use better the money. So the debt will stay the same, 2013, 2015. And of course, we have to decrease the deficit, because I'm coming from different world. I have been out until January in business. And in business, it's normal that you can lose money when you invest certain time, but then you have to make money to pay your debts back. And of course, the state is operating completely different way, thinking political decisions, spending money, and of course it starts with the salary of minister, which is, I heard, probably 4,500 euro. So then you can compare which kind of quality people you can convince to go to public sector and realize my strategies. It means to manage the state like the company. And I am doing this in Ministry of Finance. We could do it also the state in the case of majority system. But unfortunately we have coalitions, so it's a different story. So the Slovaks, they are happy because they have this majority system, and then they can do everything quickly, and also they realize this PPP project, they have about 53 kilometers of highway. This very short start.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much. So I should have explained at the beginning, of course, that you are you've seen both the private and public sector from both sides, but you're primarily speaking from your new hat on as a politician. But,
I'm not a politician. I became politician by mistake, but I'm now Minister of Finance. Yeah.
That's. Well, you're a rarity among politicians, of course, because you actually have some business experience, which unfortunately in much of Europe these days is a rare thing. If I could turn next to Dominik Tumfart from Deutsche Bank, who is very much the private sector side of this debate, and very interested to get your views on what you think the bottlenecks are in terms of providing this investment that Europe needs for its growth.
Thanks, Simon. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. It's certainly almost as warm up here this afternoon as it was outside in the sun at lunchtime. As you would expect from an infrastructure bank, I would like to make some quick observations on infrastructure financing. Seems to me quite topical to me, considering that we are in a country which provided a year ago the stability and the transparency of a legal and regulatory framework that allowed us, together with two world-leading concession companies, to arrange a landmark transaction in the European infrastructure financing sector, which was a capital markets refinancing of the R1 here in Slovakia. A landmark transaction, first time for CEE as a project bond, landmark because of the size, 1.25 billion euros, and the transaction was quite oversubscribed. I'd like to make 3 points to stimulate the discussion a little bit, and as you say, Simon, this is a private sector view. The first point I'd like to make is I'd like to make reference to the recently issued IMF World Economic Outlook, which came out in October of this year. The IMF is normally associated with this fiscal prudence, and it certainly confirms this point, but there's a very interesting chapter in there. It happens to be chapter 3, which is 40 pages long and makes fascinating reading for these odd types of infrastructure bankers like myself. It raises the question, is it time for an investment push in infrastructure? Question mark, the macroeconomic effects of public investment. And then there are 3 messages spread essentially across this text, which you can download. Number 1, in countries with infrastructure needs, I'm quoting here, the time is right for an infrastructure push, borrowing costs are low and demand is weak in advanced economies. Second, public infrastructure is an essential factor of production. Increasing public investment raises output in the short and long term. And third, and that's maybe the more interesting portion, debt-financed projects would have large output effects without increasing the debt to GDP ratios. It clearly identified needs are met through efficient investment. In other words, public infrastructure could pay for itself if done correctly. The analysis of this IMF World Economic Outlook led the respected economist and former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers to write a piece in, if I may quote from a competing publication, Simon here, to write in the FT on the 7th of October, concluding that public investment is really a free lunch. I'm sure we'll get to that later on. Is it or is it not? But the point that Larry Summers is making here in concise terms is he quotes some of the ancillary benefits of infrastructure investment, increases tax revenues, creates jobs, combats recession, increases an economy's capacity, and hence improves its ability to handle any given level of debt. The point he makes is that the tax revenues, which are generated by infrastructure investment, actually outweigh the financing cost given where we currently are in the interest rate cycle. There's one event after the publication of the IMF report which has made the push into infrastructure even more compelling, and that's the dramatic drop in oil price over the past 6 months, I should say. You all realize that on the 7th of November last week, the Brent benchmark stood at $83.4 US, the largest weekly decline in 13 years. And the largest beneficiaries among economies would be those who spend the most of net imports of oil relative to GDP. I saw an estimate yesterday. If this $30 drop in the oil price, which is essentially what we have been noticing since June, were to be prolonged for a year, this would transfer more than $400 billion from exporters to importers. So number one of my quick observation is infrastructure investments are a catalyst to growth. Number two, I'd like to comment quickly is that there are significant pools of private capital available to finance infrastructure investments. I think that was said repeatedly today already. I can quote anecdotal evidence. There are a number of transactions also in this part of the world where sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East, Canadian pension funds, Dutch pension funds, Danish pension funds, or infrastructure funds have been investing in a whole range of asset categories, from gas distribution and transmission grids to airports in a neighboring country. Budapest Airport is famously owned by a couple of Canadian infrastructure funds and pension funds. There are also significant investments, not in this part of the world, I realize, going in the Western European offshore wind sector, for example. Third point I want to make is this private capital, and huge amounts thereof, can be mobilized when there is consistency and clarity of rules. And separate topic for our discussion, potentially co-investment from the public sector, who have been extremely helpful and not only helpful, absolutely necessary catalysts of private sector investments in the years since the financial crisis. And I do completely agree with the Minister that some of the factors that catalyze that private sector growth are some of the points he mentioned, and that is transparency of rules, clear legal regulatory framework, and absence of corruption, among others.
Thank you very much, Dominic. So I'll move on to Jean-Marc Peterschmidt from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, who've been a long time working in this part of the world. Can you give us make some opening observations?
Yes, good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. And I think it's quite a momentous, an extraordinary date, really, because it's 25 years, the Minister reminded us, and it's worth looking back. Where are we coming from 25 years ago? This region, Central Europe and Southeastern Europe, which is the region I cover at EBRD, and Slovakia in particular, this is a region that went through lots of reforms, lots of modernization efforts, lots of investment, is now a member of the EU, is now a member of the Euro. It's a region that has growth starting with a 2. It is a region that has debt to GDP that's still within the Maastricht Treaty parameters. It's a region where world-class products are produced. It's a region, Slovakia at least, where there hasn't really been very severe banking crisis here because the banks in Slovakia have been comparatively quite healthy. Now, this is quite an enviable position that many European countries would like to be in. So it's not all that bad, and it's worth reflecting, where we're coming from, and we are really should all be proud of what has been achieved. But we're finding ourselves today in a situation that is difficult. Sluggish. The countries have integrated, obviously, much more in the European Union, and so have become more interdependent. Sluggish growth in the EU is bad news for this region. Geopolitical tensions further east is bad news for this region. So how do you get this new impetus? And I just want to put up a few headlines that we can maybe discuss together. But there's quite a few challenges that we are facing. Energy, first of all, and I think the situation with Russia and Ukraine is only emphasizing that much more. Huge agenda. How do you diversify your sources? How do you ensure energy security? How do you save more energy? Because there isn't any investment that will pay off faster than energy efficiency that will allow households to save, will allow corporates to become more efficient. And how, in the process, do you move away from heavy carbon content energy sources? How do you move to more sustainable energy? Infrastructure, we already talked about the infrastructure dividend and how you can bring together this fragmented region into a much more physically integrated market. But in the previous panel, we also talked about SMEs. SMEs are the big casualty, perhaps the greatest casualty of this crisis. Many have actually simply disappeared. Others are today actually struggling to stay alive, but can't really get access to finance to invest. Yet that is the majority of our employment. That is the majority of the biggest growth driver we are going to have. Further, how do you get the financing system to work again? First, looking at banks. We're coming at the end of I hope we're coming at the end of a period of regulatory reshaping, so the end of the uncertainty. But banks today, perhaps it's the regulations that are constraining. What's constraining in the wider region, the banks today, is the burden of NPLs. How do you resolve NPLs in banks and get banks to focus on what they should be doing, what they will need to be doing to get profitability, and that is lending to the economy, again, including to SMEs. How do you develop alternative financing schedule? How do you develop the capital markets, non-bank financial channels? So that's another challenge. And then on the softer side, what about structural reforms? What about investment climate? What about the building of skills and education so that you can develop more advanced products, more technology, and more value added? I think that in the long run is a big challenge for this region. So these are a few of the headlines. EBRD is public sector bank. Our mandate is private sector focused, and we're trying to bridge these two things. So we're talking about views from the both sides of the table. I hope we'll end up this panel with a view on how we can better work together and have a common agenda.
Thank you very much, Dominic. So, Dana Belitska, you're the partner responsible for the EU Account Advisory at St. Young. So you spend your time advising EU institutions on projects and project management. But perhaps you give your opening perspective, and also maybe you might have some insight on Andrej Babish's question of where this 300 million is going to come from. Perhaps maybe you've seen the document. But anyway, your opening remarks.
Yes, good afternoon. It is very unusual. I'm coming from private sector and will be speaking about public money, because if we are looking at the session, it is public and private money. And I prepared my notes, but then I thought maybe I would better reflect whatever was said earlier. There was a very good comment from ministers that we are looking back at 25 years and how we are building capitalism. I would like a little bit to look ahead, what is ahead of us and why this timing is so perfect to discuss about public and private financing. It was earlier at the opening discussion, it was Deputy Prime Minister from Slovakia made a comment that for many countries, if we are looking to serious financing, most of the money will be coming from European structural investment funds. There is very limited national budget available for significant investments. Therefore, if we are looking, and Slovakia is one of them, if we are looking at the timing, this is a perfect to discuss about financing, because at the moment, operational programs which will highlight what and how will be invested are discussed and approved by DG Regio. So from financing point of view, it's a perfect timing. Then there was also earlier very good comments about integration. Now, if we are looking at 28 member states, it's the first time when the planning is much more integrated. We have integrated planning for all 5 funds and across all 28 countries. There are 11 thematic objectives where we would like to invest money, and countries made their own decisions exactly which thematic objectives are more relevant to them. But still, we are going in one direction, and overall direction is set by Europe 2020 targets. My colleague, and I can refer to colleague like a co-panelist, made earlier very good comments about energy efficiency, about SMEs. It is now clear targets in Europe 2020, and for every country we are looking where do we stand now, where we would like to be in 2020, and how we are planning to finance it. So there are very strict rules. There were earlier discussions about financial instruments in the previous sessions, but if we are looking at European structural investment funds, up to 3 to 5% only will be allocated to financial instruments. The rest will go to grants, and it would be the overall objective, how to achieve, like situation in Czech Republic, that we are using all this money. We can always go and look for some money somewhere else, but if there are 3 billion which we can still use, that it would be to increase actually absorption rate, and at the same time, as it was discussed earlier, to reduce admin burden to institutions, to final beneficiaries, to make it much more efficient and lighter. And of course, reflecting again to this performance needed for the new programming period, there will be very clear target for performance framework. That my discussion, what I would like to bring to the panel, to be much more practical, how to get the money which is on the table, how to link with the private via PPP, and how to achieve those objectives which have been highlighted in Europe 2020.
Thank you very much, Dana. That brings the conversation, the discussion nicely round. And well, the panels each identified a number of bottlenecks. It's interesting to sort of discuss each of them a little bit in turn. But I think the first one would be interesting to discuss is the one really that I think Andrej Babiš, the minister, has identified. I mean, Peter reminds us that how much has changed in the region. But I have to say, the last time I was in Bratislava was in the summer of 1990, when as a very excited student, I traveled all around the region, and I traveled around on the trains, and I have to remember, my memory is that they were some of the slowest trains I've ever been on. So it's clear that Bratislava has changed a lot in 24 years, but you tell me that the trains in the region are still very slow, and the roads still haven't been, so some things haven't changed. But it seems to me, Minister, you're saying that really the key bottleneck here for you is actually government and national politics, that it's actually the ability of governments to deliver projects in terms of, whether it's some of the volunteers. I mean, is that right? And if so, now that you're actually in government, what thoughts can you give in terms of how European countries can actually improve or address some of these bottlenecks? Is there something that either Europe can do or that national governments themselves can? What can be done to try and make it easier to deliver these projects?
So for me, really, when I came to public sector, it was really a shock. So because normally I was managing 300 companies, and of course you centralize a lot of things. So now in Czech Republic we don't have any cash pooling, we don't have any central purchase, we don't have any central real estate company. So the state is renting some space from private owners for 400 million, and the same space the state rents for 170 million. So there's no cooperation, because when you are in coalition, it's like three part of the government. So, and what is the worst are political decisions. This is the nightmare, that there is no logical decisions but political decisions. And let's speak about energy in Germany. There was a tsunami in Japan, and Germany decided to close nuclear power plants. Unbelievable. No? So where is the logic? I mean, where is the... So, or in Czech Republic we have ČEZ. No? It's a big company, and they forgot to make their homework. No, they went to Albania, Bulgaria, they spent 3 and 5 billion euro investing. Romania, instead to invest in nuclear power plants in Czech Republic to provide on long-term energy for people and companies and everything. So there is not really very much logic and infra. So because we need, of course, foreign investors. We need that the Czech company invest, and then what they need. So they need this infrastructure, cheap energy, then manpower. So look at we have the biggest number of private schools in Europe, 59. What does it mean, the high school diploma today for me? Nothing. Because if you are going to state school and you are not successful, you then go to private, and you will get this diploma at the end. So what we need, the state is supplying thousands of professions what really the entrepreneurs don't need. We need technical professions. So this is the problem in every sector. So there are a lot of not logical things. So let's speak about unemployment. So we have now unemployment is decreasing. I mean, Czech Republic is doing very well. I mean, its deficit is going down. Investments, construction company now increasing the business, and then when we are speaking about unemployment, I'm asking why in every construction company the workers are from Ukraine. Why in all retails and restaurants and hotels are Slovak and Polish people in Czech? Why? Why a lot of people are unemployed and receiving black money, working? Why there is abuse of social expenses for living? So this is the problem in our coalition, because I don't want to build social state like in France, where the people have to work 35 hours, and it's a big scandal if somebody say, okay, you have to work 42. And look at France, they are close to 100% of debt of the GDP. What is the solution? I don't know. So there are a lot of problems, and it starts with political system, with the quality of people, with the definition of politician. Aristotle said this is the politician should be the best of us, the elite. So I don't know if the people 25 years after revolution have a feeling that we have elite in politics in Czech. I don't speak about Slovakia. So this is the base problem. So I was shocked yesterday. I heard because we have a problem now within the Minister of Transport how we build the highways. Yeah. So some chief of construction company told me, yes, but we tender first the project, and then the company which will build the highway. So, and then there is a lot of problems because there are more, let's say, invoicing than the contract. So, but it's easy. So let's change it to design and build. So the state should say, okay, I want here highway, and offer me everything. Yeah? So this is really how the state operates. It's very, very unlogical, and this political influence is the same story with euro. So I'm against euro because I'm afraid about this political decision. Yeah, because Czech Republic is export, and so we export about 12 billion euro more than we import now. We had just the first year of the devaluation of Czech crown, which was a big surprise. And the impact on the economy is very low because everybody was hedged, and of course the impact was negative on population and on importers. But anyway, if it stays like it is, it will be very positive for the economy. But of course, if we start to debate about the rate, in Slovakia they make a special rate, in Monaco somewhere, and now what will the politicians say? What is the rate? Today is 27.50, okay? So it's good for people. Let's make 22 for importers. But in 5 years, the whole export industry will be dead. So that's why for us, I mean, it's better to make reasonable decisions, not political decisions. And this is the big problem. But we will probably not solve it today. So it's the problem of whole Europe. If you take Europe, 15% population of the world, 30 GDP, and 65% of social expenses. So this is all problem. Renewables, we are on the top. We have to make renewables, but all other countries outside Europe, they don't respect Kyoto Protocol. So this is a lot of problems within the Euro which we have to solve, and so I mean every country should take care about his economic position. We have to cooperate, but we have to think really what has to be decided centrally in Brussels, and we need more flexibility. We really have to think again about what we want to centralize and what we want to be independent.
Thank you, Ronald. Well, I want to stick just for a moment more on this bottleneck of national politics. I think it's important to be realistic about what Europe can deliver and what finance can deliver when in this context. I'll come to you, Dominic, for your perspective. I mean, I wonder if I should feel sorry for you being an infrastructure banker in Europe when, in this 25 years since that we had these revolutions in this part of the world, we've seen dozens of entire new cities of 10 million people have spring up in China, and we've seen much of the Middle East providing, in vast new cities and infrastructure. So, could you just give us a bit of context in terms of how from your perspective, from the private sector provider of infrastructure financing, how Europe compares, and which countries have been more successful than others in terms of building infrastructure? I mean, which countries have the Aristotelian ideal of politicians who've been able to deliver the infrastructure, and how do you see it from your perspective in terms of that bottleneck?
That's a pretty broad question, and I really need to restrict myself to non-political statements here as a private sector representative. I think it's quite exciting. I'm too short-sighted to see what the Twitter feed is doing, but I think it's quite exciting when the Czech finance minister announces in public session that he's thinking about design, build, finance, and maintenance. A lot of people. You have or you have not?
No, we don't have it. But it's quite easy to change it, and it will simplify a lot of things. It will speed up the time of building of highways. I mean, we can adopt just the law they have in Germany. So we have just to learn around what is the best for us.
I think, coming to your point, to your question, Simon, there are clearly differences in the quality of infrastructure being built up across Europe. There's been a lot of activity which has been the result of the various European funds. One only needs to drive in Southern Europe to see that there are fantastic motorways these days, which oftentimes are better than the motorways in some more centrally or northwestern located European countries. I think it's difficult to make a clear comparison between different countries' success stories in infrastructure. The point of origin where countries were starting off are very different. But there is certainly some observations to be made when you look around these days. When my colleague here was making reference before to the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Iron Curtain, when Western Germany was tasked with basically taking over Eastern Europe, Eastern Germany, and upgrading the infrastructure there, an enormous technological leap was made, as a result of which you have some of the most modern fiber networks, telecommunication networks in Europe these days in the eastern part of Germany. And I think this would be an opportunity, as we're all trying to revive the European economies, to really make that quantum leap, or that quality leap in upgrading infrastructure where it is needed. As somebody who travels across Europe on a weekly basis, I certainly notice significant differences in terms of how easy it is to get from an airport into town, or how difficult it can be. So the existence of high-speed rail links can be an enormous factor, not only of personal ease and personal comfort, but also of effectiveness and of cost competitiveness. And I would argue that infrastructure, state-of-the-art infrastructure in telecommunication, in transport, in energy supply, in energy transmission distribution will be one of the key factors of global competitiveness going forward. I don't know whether this answers your very generic question, a very broad question, or some aspects of it at least.
Well, some aspects, yes. So, well, I didn't mean to embarrass you on drawing to political territory, more just to try and draw out the idea of what's working and what doesn't. But Dana, can I come to you, because you mentioned all these, draw attention to all these funds that don't get spent. Could you just give us an idea of what the sort of pipeline of projects is in Europe, and what why they're not getting spent, and what can be done, what can be done to boost the pipeline of projects to get more infrastructure spending going?
You made a very valid comments that firstly maybe why not all funds are observed is actually the project pipeline. But before that, I would like to make a more general comment about planning, that Europe is planning now better and better every day by more centralized approach. There was a very good comment made on transport, on energy, and on broadband. And now for this programming period, starting from this year, Europe created Connecting Europe facility with 36 billion, where actually transport block is addressed by 26 billion, 11 for energy, and 1 for broadband. So there is a nice, good planning. If we are looking at transport block, it is very much linked for European structural and investment funds, where cohesion fund countries, money has been allocated to CEF, and what is expected, and what DG Regio and INEA, who is administrating CEF, is expecting from countries, a wide strategy on transport, on energy. CEF, I think it was earlier also discussed today, that there is a big move forward independence of energy sector. CEF immediately and DG Move analyzed and recognized it, and there was a decision made to allocate certain amount of money to Baltic states to be more independent. So from Europe-wide, there is a very good and overall planning to have a whole Europe, CEF is looking at transport corridors, and it was very well discussed earlier, where do we need these transport corridors? And the second is to achieve, if there is a money allocated, it would be up to each member state to ensure high quality and good quality projects. And it includes feasibility study, cost-benefit analysis, and so on. It's really to prepare a good application and then really to increase absorption. And of course, as it was correctly mentioned earlier, a little bit more increase public administration capacity. And there is technical assistance money to increase awareness and also skills for public administrations.
Thank you, thank you. So just, Dominic, you mentioned a different bottleneck, which is finance. I mean, one of the
You mean
points...
Jean-Marc?
Sorry?
You mean Jean-Marc?
Sorry,
that's
sorry,
right.
I beg your pardon, Jean-Marc. Jean-Marc, you mentioned the finance bottleneck, and you know, it's sort of the discussion earlier, and you know, to a sense implicitly on this panel has been that there's abundant liquidity around. But in a sense, you're saying that actually that's not necessarily the case. That the banking sector faces some quite severe hurdles in terms of being able to lend, and also perhaps be able to lend for the kind of maturities that are necessary for these kind of projects. So, and you raised the subject of alternative finance and non-bank sources of finance. So maybe you could elaborate a bit on that. And is there, I mean, and obviously at the moment the hot topic in Europe is capital markets union. I mean, is there, what can, what do you, I mean, when you talk about alternative finance, what do you think are the key issues there in terms of boosting the supply of finance? What are the key issues for finance providers, do you think, in terms of investing in these projects?
Okay, just maybe to link up with what was said before, and I'll move on to that question. But just to emphasize that the quality of policies and of politics in general in the countries has been shown as being a very good predictor as to where these countries end up. And where it links with what we are talking about is, you know, it's about the quality of governance in the public sector, governance in the private sector. That is about the quality of the institutions, and therefore the capacity to prepare and come forward with good projects. And that is what's going to attract the financing. And there is financing out there that is chasing projects like that. Now, we are in a region that from financial flows has been overly dependent on one channel, principally, which is banks, and mostly subsidiaries of Western banks that have relied a lot initially on transfers from parent to the respective subsidiary. Now that's a good thing because it has happened, it has allowed to get things going, but it hasn't proved quite resilient at the time of crisis, and you see a lot of backtracking from that, and the challenge now for the banks is to find other sources of finance. But that is a challenge for good project providers in general. It's for infrastructure projects, it's for utilities, it's for corporates. So one source there is, you know, how do you leverage more on the capital markets? And capital markets is one sector that I think still is very undeveloped in this region. And it's only perhaps with this crisis that everybody's come to a realization that the development of capital markets, local domestic capital markets, and local currency denominated capital markets is key. And if you look at the business the EBRD is doing in this region, you see a very clear shift towards supporting more debt and equity capital market transactions in Central Europe, so in the sort of more advanced countries of the EBRD, by being an anchor investor in bond issues, or by being an anchor investor in equity issues, IPOs. That is one area which is a very big priority of ours, but we only accompany a movement that's very clearly taking place in the region. There's lots of institutional investors worldwide that are prepared to invest money in good projects. There are pension funds, and we tend to think about this of, you know, the countries of Eastern Europe looking at Western Europe, but there's a whole world out there. There are sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East that are chasing projects to invest in. Some countries have looked at that a little bit more and have tried to attract such funds. There is a lot of money in China, public or private, that is looking at other destinations, and that may come to this region. And so I think we need to keep an open mind as to where the sources of funding and of investment might come from, and it's not just Western Europe.
Yes.
I'd just like to respond to Jean-Marc, what you're saying. I think, yes, it depends a lot on some private sector infrastructure developers and infrastructure players, but there are also political decisions to be made. It's about prioritization. Do you invest, do you spend taxpayer money on benefits, or do you spend taxpayer money on basically creating new infrastructure or upgrading existing infrastructure? Because these private sector players will need some structure and some regulatory and legal framework around projects in order to be able to allocate resources to it. This is why I don't completely agree with Larry Summers' argument that infrastructure investment is a free lunch, because ultimately you need the political decisions to be made to say we outsource designing, building, financing, operation, construction, maintenance of a certain asset that provides an essential service to citizens, to the private sector, for whatever reason. And if you make that decision, then you will also need to allocate the financial resources over time to allow the private sector to operate these assets in a profitable way. We can obviously discuss what the right level of profit, the right level of risk-weighted return should be, but that is an essential task of policymakers to say we outsource infrastructure, construction, operation, maintenance to the private sector.
I fully agree with that, and I think we need to look at it in less segregated ways. Today we think, okay, an infrastructure investment is either completely public, and with these massive transfers you have within the EU through the structural and cohesion funds, you know, that can be up to 85% grant finance. So you have that family of projects. And then you have other projects that are the minority, which are only the private sector projects. So I think there's key decision making there on how do you select these projects, how do you prioritize them. But I would add, how can you bring these two worlds together? How can you make a smarter, better use of the grants or other guarantees or backup that can be provided by the public sector to more systematically leverage, catalyze the private sector to come in. And by that, you get additional private sector money, but you also get the private sector experience, the private sector discipline in implementing these projects and making them efficient.
Dana.
And if I can add, I can't agree more, and that is what it's, if I described EU planning, it was so well done and everything is well organized, but the one thing which is really not so advanced, it is public-private partnership once we are combining European structural investment funds and private funding. And there are very, very few examples, and if we are looking forward, that would be one way, because only financial instruments, it will not solve problem, but public-private partnership for big infrastructure projects. And also, I would say also for CEF Connecting Europe facility, because that is looking for projects across several countries, where it's not only one country is benefiting, but several. So that would be something to expand and to develop. And the first one would be the right legislative basis to ensure investment.
I think it's time we asked if anybody from any questions from the floor or any comments from the floor. Is any, I can see some hands. Yes, I can see one here, and one here. Any more? Any more? We should take these two, and then maybe there'll be some others. Just say who you are and where you're from. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Andrej Šrámek. I'm from Knauf Insulation in the Czech Republic. Would like to pick up on the question of energy efficiency, which was mentioned, I think, by two panelists. There is an increasing emerging trend in the UK looking at energy efficiency, especially in buildings, as an infrastructure priority because it has impacts on the energy grid and everything else. I think that's a trend worth following. And I would like to ask Mr. Deputy Prime Minister Babiš, in his capacity as Minister of Finance, we have coming to the question of operational funds that we are getting now from EU. A lot of that will be allocated on energy efficiency, which is great. There is a lot of verbal support for energy efficiency by your government. That is great as well. I think the issue which could be worked on and improved is how these programs are scattered in different ministries. So if you're talking about energy efficiency in a kindergarten, you have to go to one ministry. If you're talking about energy efficiency in single home, you have to go to another ministry. Multifamily home, you have to go to another ministry. Hospital, another ministry. Could we maybe take some inspiration in Germany with their KfW, I think excellent program, which concentrates all that into one single clear program, because that's, I think, how you can think about attracting foreign investors and private capital. You have to clarify and simplify, and I think there is a room for improvement in this regard in the Czech Republic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you want to reply, and then while the microphone comes?
Yeah, and that's good question. You know, the problem how the state is organized. So we have, for instance, for example, research we have in 13 different ministries. Yeah. So we built now about 44 research centers, and I'm now asking since January, show me the business plan, how we build it, because somebody now came and said, okay, for operate these centers, we would need 25 billion crowns, yeah? Or how the money flows within the state, yeah? So, I mean, for regional, I mean, for this Hetman, so the money comes for 130 different places, yeah? So these programs, which somebody decided before, of course, we practically irritated. So also EU, is pushing us to use 20% of these funds for soft programs. Yes, I mean education and seminars and so on. And we would prefer, of course, to use this money for concrete projects. So now we change this system of how organize this money from Europe. We have taken it from this regional organization and we concentrate it in a ministry for development. But the influence of our government was very limited. So we were practically we were fighting to, let's say, fulfill the conditions which we were obliged to do in 2004. I mean, we were the last country in Europe which adopted the law about the state employees and also this environmental audit and other conditions. So, of course, now our, let's say, space to operate is very limited. So, in the past, somebody decide how this money has to be distributed, and we have a big lack of cleaning water stations and all these assets which we need to invest. So and also it's quite difficult to discuss with European Union, with Commission, and convince them to change and to move this money from program which we are capable to use to or not use to projects in which we can really invest. So unfortunately, Czech Republic really underestimate our activity within EU because practically from 2004 to 2020 we got 1,580 billion crowns to get in concrete programs, and nobody made really the strategy at the beginning. What is the priority of the state, and it was not done, and now of course to change it, it's quite difficult.
Yes,
I'll add something to this energy efficiency question, because we at the EBRD feel quite passionate about this and have been trying to roll this out more widely. Slovakia is a very good case in point, because we've had for a number of years here energy efficiency programs and committed about 260 million for it. How does it work? It's very simple. You get commercial money from the banks, and there you can get the credit lines from the EBRD or from elsewhere. Commercial money from the banks goes to the households, the housing associations for collective buildings, or businesses. You blend it with two things. One, technical advice, helping people figure out what it is they're actually going to have to do. How much is it going to save them, and how quickly does it pay back? Two, you inject a little grant, not very much, 15, 20% is enough, no need to over-subsidize this, just to overcome the initial market barrier, and you get your consultant to verify that actually the works are done and the savings are done. It works, this product distributes like hotcakes, really. Why? Because for banks, it's a good way to go back into lending to good projects. For households or for businesses, it creates savings and it makes them more competitive. It makes your economy greener, and it mobilizes activity from suppliers of equipment, builders, and people who do the works. It's an absolute no-brainer. It's an absolute winner. And the leverage you get out of the little public funds you put in is 1 to 5 at least. There is almost infinite scope in doing this, but you need very structured and very simple one-stop shop solutions, integrated solutions. But we're a great believer in this.
Dana, you wanted to add something?
Yes, and if I can add, I like that it was structured and simplified solution. If you are looking again from funding perspectives, there is an implementation regulation from EU, which is issued in September, and 3 standard financial instruments have been defined, and one of them is renovation loan, which is specifically targeted for energy efficiency. And if I can give any advice, that I would always go for a standard solution, because then you don't need to look at state and some other issues, that it is very clearly. And I would encourage to look at this document and then use the standard products.
But I would add one thing, the issue, and it comes back to how do you mobilize private finance and how do you structure these projects. You implement these projects, and what we've seen in some countries, you do this, and you have this leverage ratio of 1 to 5, okay? So you put 20% grant and 80% commercial financing. And it works because the projects pay back very quickly. And suddenly somebody gets a great idea and say, oh, we need to do more about this. I come in with a project that's subsidized 80% because I have structural funds for it. What have you just done? You just killed the market completely. Okay? And then it's going to last as long as it takes to use that subsidy, and then suddenly you're back to how do we create this commercial, private sector-driven approach to the sector. And that is lack of coordination and not smart use of subsidy.
Right. Question, yes. Any other questions? While
Ivan Bayer, Society for Futurology. I have a question about the possible impacts of new Silk Road on European infrastructure as a whole, as a macro region. last summit, APEC summit. In this summit, China stated that they really want to start building new Silk Road. Historically, always China began on their soil. But now this initiative started on European soil because China skillfully bought cheap grease ports and already start upgrading them. In Romania, there's probably a new story about upgrading ports, railroads for export of grain and so on. So why cannot Europe start cooperating with China and start upgrading European ports, roads, airports, and so on in synergy with Chinese plans, because this can bring bigger benefits than costs. But there are issues, as Mr. Minister mentioned, in each country there are different approaches to the infrastructure. So how can we bridge these different reasons to start build pan-European infrastructure as an answer on the other end of this new Silk Road and new plan of its revitalization? So the history now can begin also in Europe, not only in China. This is my question, and this may be synergy of all the possible infrastructure changes in Europe. So this is my answer.
Thank you. Dominic, do you want to solve that? Why can't Europe build its own ports and airports?
I'm not quite sure I completely got the question, because there is some Chinese investment happening anywhere. I mean, one of the Chinese state-owned companies owns a significant portion of Portugal's largest power company, for example. So I think that is happening. I think where there is a certain level of cautiousness is where we're talking about infrastructure which is related to high technology, such as telecommunication, or even in certain parts of the renewable energy sector, offshore wind, for example, where for a number of reasons there have not been any Chinese co-investments yet. But I think in principle that is happening already anyway. There was Fosun, one of the largest family-owned conglomerates in China, recently bought a Portuguese insurance company. So I'm not quite sure what you were driving at. I mean, there is some investment going on, but I think when you look at some of the big Chinese pools of capital, obviously they have the whole world available to invest, and they have invested in resources, natural resources in Africa, to get access to some resources used in their technological and their manufacturing businesses back home. They've been investing in port infrastructure from Sri Lanka to other parts of Asia. I think there is some of that going on, but they are also in Europe, in fairness. Each of these attractive European infrastructure assets is typically sold in competitive auction these days. And my guess is in some of these competitive processes, the Chinese bidders did not offer the best price.
But Dominic, I've got a slightly different angle on the same question, which is why is it whenever we talk about this infrastructure in Europe, we always end up talking about sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East or from China, or we talk about Canadian pension funds? Why can't Europe build its own infrastructure? Why can't it finance its own infrastructure? Where are the pools of capital in Europe? It's a rich region. It's much richer than Asia or the Middle East. What's the bottleneck there?
Because in the case of Canada, for example, Simon, it has a fully funded pension system. In other words, every Canadian dollar of pension a payment is actually invested, is not coming out of state coffers, it is invested through these diverse pension funds. There are several countries in Europe which are similar. I think the Dutch and the Danish public pension systems are probably the best funded at this moment. But I would certainly agree with you. It's certainly a model to follow. And when you look around now, what's happening anyway? I mean, the large European insurance companies are all and other pools of capital. They are diversifying into infrastructure at a time when 30-year German government bonds give negative yields, as they did yesterday. That's the only way to make the kind of returns you need to meet certain financial obligations towards your bondholders, shareholders, policyholders, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of discussion in the earlier panel about banking regulation and how that might be a bottleneck on the supply of bank finance. But it seems to me that not nearly enough attention's gone on in Europe in terms of insurance regulation and pension regulation, in terms of the way in which that's massively impeding the creation of pools of capital in Europe that could supply and to fund these long-term developments. But anyway, that's the chair's very partial opinion. Anyway, does anybody, any other questions from? Do you want to comment? Sorry, do you want to comment?
I wanted to comment on China. I mean, for Czech Republic, it was a political problem because our government was criticizing the human rights in China, and practically there was no business, no investment. So the balance export-import was 300 billion imports and 30 billion export for Czech. And now our president visits China, and of course we are member of EU, NATO. It's clear foreign policy, but I think Czech Republic, small country, we have to make neutral policy, and in the case of China, it's very important. I mean, the Chinese, they went to Hungary, they bought a big chemical plant, they are investing there. So now it's changing, and it's same for us, the relation with Arabic countries and so on. So and Chinese, they have a lot of money. So now, after a very long time, there was the first visit of our president, and we are speaking about investments, about cooperation, to open the flight connection between the Czech and Beijing, and this is, and also about tourists, because it's also a very big income. So in this case, China, it's a political problem.
Another political problem. Okay, we're running out of time, so I'll take these. They've got two questions here. If you keep your questions brief, I promise to get the panel to keep their answers brief.
I'll keep it brief. My name is TATRA. I'm from the American Embassy here. Right now, the United States and Europe are negotiating the largest trade partnership ever, largest free trade agreement ever, the transatlantic trade, and actually the third word is investment partnership, TTIP. What kind of chances do you guys see for success in those negotiations, and how do you think that they will affect this issue of investment?
Should we take both questions at the same time, and then you can? There's one at the back there, and then you can.
Hi, my name is Josef Vadida from Slovakia, and a journalist here. Here in this panel, we speak about funding, but I would like to ask about cost efficiency, because there was mentioned connected Europe facility measure. This fund which would support projects, special project, for example, an energy project called Project of Common Interest, PCI project. And here in Central Europe, I have a really good case. We would like to build one interconnector, gas interconnector from Slovakia to Poland, and another interconnector from Czech Republic to Poland. Two parallel pipelines. The same idea, to bring gas from LNG gas from Poland to this Central Europe. Both projects are supported by these European funds, by this CEF. I don't see where is this cost efficiency. if we would like to build both parallel pipelines. So somebody in Brussels give the money, and we here again in Central Europe, it's probably not just case of Central Europe, but we decided we would like to build our pipeline, don't caring about other countries and about competing projects. It's useless in the case that we would like to build two parallel pipelines. So cost efficiency.
Thank you very much. Can I start with you, Minister? Do you want to answer the question about TTIP and about cost efficiency?
You mean about this treaty between the US and Europe? No?
Yes, the trade deal between them.
Yeah. No, so, I mean, we don't have so much details how this negotiation is going on. I met some representative, and of course, it's very important for Europe, and of course, it's a question how Europe will negotiate, and because I mean, in US it's clear, it's buy American, and it's a strategy. And I'm afraid that there will be a lot of influence, there will be elections, so probably we have to wait for Hillary if she will be a new president, and probably she has to say what is the opinion about this, because I mean, it's my opinion, I'm sorry, but so I got this impression when I have spoken with the representative of EU, but for car industry is very important for Czech and Slovak because of course car for homologization and everything, and now the car producers, they are very much interested, European car producers, to sell cars to US without doing any improvement or changes and so on. So in technical specification, very big issue is agriculture and food, and so it's a huge list of products, and of course also licenses, and there are a lot of obstacles in trade and standards and so on. So it's quite complicated, but I think it's very important for both US and Europe, and I think it will be bring to the end, but when it's a question. So I think it will, from the side of United States, it will be postponed, and there will be some political influence at the end.
Any thoughts on the other question on cost efficiency of?
Look, efficiency, of course, I mean, the public sector is not really thinking about efficiency, so I mean, it's a good question. I mean, you know, every day we are speaking about real estate. Maybe it's a problem of stock exchange in Prague. We have a lot of state-owned companies which are very profitable. We could go to IPOs and get 40%, a lot of cash, and then maybe to get some dividends. But we didn't discuss it within the coalition. It's again political problem that one party don't want to privatize. We would like, because I see in this a lot of money. So it's really efficiency. Of course, the state could be much more efficient, but it was not, let's say, this is not the philosophy. I mean, the people, they don't think like this. They don't think like the private sector. It's completely different. They want to spend their budget and to have a big budget and then to spend it at the end. And the most in December, of course, because if not, they will lose it for the next year. And I don't want to speak about the balance sheet of the state. This is really an unbelievable story for me, because normally, I mean, yes, no better no comments.
Dana, you work a lot with the private sector, with the public sector. Do you recognise that? Do you want to? I mean, do you want to just A, respond to those questions, and B, make any final thoughts? I'll take the panel in reverse order. So if you.
Yes, of course, I agree with the minister from Czech Republic, but if we are looking more for Connecting Europe facility, I think that's a good thing that Europe is actually looking at these common interest projects, at projects which are across different countries, and I fully agree that it must be planned, and I think DG Move, by agreeing and discussing with member states, is trying to align that there is this cost efficiency. I think it is moving in that direction.
Okay, thank you very much. Jean-Marc, any final thoughts on the questions and any final thoughts on the...
No, I have no idea why there are two pipelines side by side, but I'm sure somebody knows. I can confirm the difficulty is often to bring many of the big projects that we're looking at are obviously not just one country project, there are several country projects. And bringing the countries together and agreeing on a pipeline of projects that will be prioritized on all sides is difficult. And this is the challenge IFIs like the EIB, like ourselves, like others are facing in financing this in a sort of a rational way. So you're making a good point, and I emphasize that it's important to pay attention to make good use of the public money that's injected in this. On the US agreement, I think, first of all, trade matters. So if it's only enhanced trade between Europe and the US, then that's already a good thing. And I just note that we haven't seen too many industrial investments from the US coming to this region, but we've seen financial investors coming in. Last year, we actually closed a previously private equity financed business in the Balkans. This is a media, cable, telephony, regional operation that was bought by KKR. So KKR came into this region on a transaction that is actually worth $1 billion. Well, that is big, big news for this region, and we want to see more of those.
By the same token, European wind turbine manufacturers are conquering North America.
Perfect.
And I think anything in response to that question is, I think without knowing the details, I would say anything that removes trade barriers and removes distortions to competition and increases investment security should be welcome on both sides of the Atlantic.
Great, thank you very much. Final word to you, Minister. Very good. Thank you very much, everybody, for a very... Thank you.